It is finally time for us to talk about The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. So let's jump into this. Hello, book friends. It's Alyssa. Welcome back to the channel. Hello, if you are new. This is very long overdue, but it's finally time for me to sit down and talk about our book club pick. I think this is from September and October. That's how behind I am. But The Woman Destroyed by Simone de Beauvoir. I have always seen this around. The cover is very enticing. I've read one other Simone de Beauvoir before. It's something that was more recently translated. I think it's called Inseparables or The Inseparables. And I really enjoyed that writing style and the stories she was telling. And I was very interested to read this more classic collection of shorter works from her. And they did not disappoint. So let's kind of dive into it. I have several notes. We're going to just kind of jump in. And yeah, so thank you to everybody who read along with me while we were reading it. I really enjoy doing that. And I hope that that will continue to grow as I continue to make videos here. But anyway, let's just get to the notes. I have lots of notes. This is a collection of 3 short stories that focus on women in their later life, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed having stories about women in middle age, women in the like menopausal kind of period of life. It was nice to have that represented. I don't think that I get to read those stories often. I'm not going to say that they don't exist. I just don't think they get as much shelf space as maybe the stories about, like 20 somethings going through their quarter life crisis or teens or things like that. So reading about people that were more my contemporary in age was wonderful. But each of these women are at a crisis point, and we have to watch them as they attempt to handle this crisis, like each of their crises. And they can be hard to empathize with in the beginning. I found them kind of difficult to empathize with in the beginning, at least. This is my opinion on this, especially with her second story. But I did find that as I continued reading, the characters grow on you. You begin to understand their motivations and why perhaps they're on the more difficult side, that kind of thing. So they're really complex women, and I enjoyed how de Beauvoir renders these women and gives us really complex characters, female characters. And I found that, like, not only did I learn to like them, but I kind of understood them better. I understood their motivations, and it was a nice journey through each of these stories with each of these women. As I said, they're very complex, they're very well rendered, and I think it's important to remember that women have these very deep, complex emotional lives, very internal lives that maybe don't get talked about or maybe weren't being talked about while Simone de Beauvoir was writing. Her contemporaries were perhaps not focused on those narratives. I think about A Room of One's Own and Woolf ruminating on the idea of what is a woman's story. You have all these, she goes and she looks for up women in the library, and they're all men writing about women. And here you have a woman, not just writing about women, but writing about women of a certain age, which is definitely a demographic that isn't as attractive, I guess, to the author to authors, I guess, in general. So we're looking at things like motherhood, wifedom, marriage, and how those impact the lives of women and how that impact is kind of different for men. We also look at things like time and how time changes a person, particularly women, especially within the confines of married life. You can live with someone for years and realize you no longer know them anymore. You also can have children that you raise with certain ideals and certain principles, and they grow into their own individual selves. And you can be faced with is this even the child I raised kind of moments. We also look at how aging affects women, both internally and externally, and how they're treated and seen by society, how there is kind of there is a devaluing of women as they get older, as they lose their looks, as they lose their value to society. Do you go out and replace them with someone younger? And There's also a look at how women lose their identity when they become mothers and wives and take on these other the mantle of all these other roles in life. How there is the person that gets the woman themselves gets lost in the roles that she's playing. And then over time, there's this like divergence that can occur, and therein lies a point at which one can have an existential crisis. You spend so many years being a wife, a mother, and when you become an empty nester, or when you're getting divorced, or when you can no longer do your job, or whatever it is that creates a shift, you start to look back and realize there are pieces of yourself that you've left behind in order to take on these new roles. And how do these new roles redefine you as a person? And is that person that was there prior to this, are is that person still the same person? I mean, it's the perfect set of stories for someone like Simone de Beauvoir, that is an existential philosopher, to be presenting to us. I really enjoyed them. I'm going to link a video down below that I think does a really good job of sort of giving a very high level overview of who Simone de Beauvoir is. Should you want some more background on her, this is really a video to talk about these stories, but and my thoughts on those stories. If you want more on the philosopher, the writer, the woman that is Simone de Beauvoir, I will leave a couple things linked in the description for that. But she is a very interesting and influential philosopher, existential philosopher. Um, like many people from the past, she's not perfect. And like many of the early feminists, she's definitely not perfect, but is an incredibly important piece of the historical puzzle. So, very important person to look at and look into their work if you are somebody who wants to know more either about like philosophy or feminism or anything like that. So, anyway, with all that aside, let's talk about the three stories. So the first story is Age of Discretion, and we're following a husband and a wife who are becoming empty nesters. They have a grown son who's married. The mom doesn't really like the daughter-in-law all that much. The mother is a writer. The father is like a scientist. He works in a lab. They're on the older side. He is kind of going through the phase of his life where he feels like he can't work like he used to, like maybe he just can't produce like he used to. He's kind of okay with it, like he's a little bit more acclimated to this transitioning to this next phase of life. The wife is a writer, and she's just finished something that ends up not being as successful as she had hoped. In the beginning, she feels like he's a bit silly for thinking that he's too old to be doing X, Y, and Z. By the end of the narrative, she is a little bit more empathetic to his feelings, because she starts to now question her ability to do her job. But there's a lot of other things that she is questioning throughout the story, and a lot of those are centered around her life as a mother, some as a wife, but really much as a mother, and how motherhood has changed her. She and her husband have raised her son with certain ideals, and he goes out and marries this like wealthier woman who is on a different side of the political spectrum, and that has influenced how he perceives life. And so she has a falling out with her son over differences of political opinion, and that causes a lot of tension throughout the narrative, and it causes her to question a lot of things and look back and reflect on her own life. It's a wonderfully complex story. I really enjoyed it. But we're really looking at a couple key things here: empty nesters, transitional periods in your life, and how do you deal with that? Like empty nesting, like are we at the end of our career? Do we retire? What do we do then? And just old age. She spends a lot of time thinking about death and being, like past her prime, and like the long slog, like march towards death. She says, I was frightened by the wasteland through which I was going to have to drag myself until death came for me. And there's a lot of passages like that. It's a lot of reflecting on time and how quickly time is passing and realizing how much time has passed. Each year goes by more quickly than the last. I shall not have so very long to wait before I go to sleep forever. And yet I know how slowly the hours could drag by, and I still love life too much for the idea of death to be a consolation. The questions that she's grappling with a lot of them are centered around this idea of if we've achieved everything, if we've peaked as women, mothers, creatives, people in general, do we just die? What's our point? This is your existential crisis. What is this next phase? What are we supposed to be doing when it feels like we've done everything we were supposed to do, right? You got married, you got the home, you had the kids, you got a career, you did the stuff, you were successful. Now all that is kind of wrapping up and you have this next phase of your life. What do you do with it? Do you just wait till death comes? do you What do you do? Do you keep going on being that creative, doing your job? Uh, how do you shift and change? Is there a good way to do it? How do you manage old age? Basically, is the age of discretion. It is one of those cases in which old age is a happy period, old age after a hard life, one that has been more or less eaten up by others. Do we reclaim this period of our life where we are no longer eaten up by others and do stuff for ourselves? I enjoyed this rumination on this struggle. I'm not sure if we come to any real answers. I think that it's a very personal thing. What do you do when you no longer have to live your life for other people? How do you reclaim your older years and make them your own? How do you reclaim the self you left behind to be able to live your life as a mother and whatever that period of your life, that wife mother period of your life, and now you're in the retiring old age period of your life. Who are you now? Who is your husband? Is it the same relationship? What is happening here? The husband is not really struggling. He's just kind of winding down his career and accepting things, and she is struggling to accept that she's in a creative crisis, that she's run out of ideas, that she really can't continue to write but wants to continue to write. And do you plateau as a writer? Do you ever age out of it? How do you keep carrying on? And then how does life change in a marriage? If you were focused on one thing and now you're in old age and you have a whole new set of life things to deal with. How does your marriage change? Do you even know the person anymore? Are you the same people that entered this marriage? How do you reconcile the people you are now with the people you were? How do the people you are now relate to the children you raised? The Age of Discretion was just an excellent rumination on aging and the passage of time and transitional states, and I really enjoyed this. The second story, the monologue, was perhaps the most difficult one. It is more stream of consciousness. Our narrator is this divorced woman, and she is quite literally spiraling. It's like Bastille Day. She's in her apartment. People are like partying all over the place, and she's angry about all of the noise. She's angry at men. She's angry at the world. She's sometimes thinking back on her past life prior to her divorce. And you kind of hate her. She says like a lot of really nasty things. She's not very nice. But as the story unfolds, you do begin to have a little bit of empathy for her. And when you find out why she's spiraling and why and what has happened to her, what had happened to her family, what drove a wedge between her and her husband, you start to empathize with her more, and it does shift the way you interact with the story. This took me a while to get through, even though it's quite short, because at first I disliked her so much. I feel like I really got into the first story and I was like cranking through it, and then I stalled out a couple pages into the monologue because I was like, oh, I just hate this character so much. But it's like you gotta plow through, you gotta do it, Alyssa. And I'm glad I did. I did, and I don't know if I liked her exactly, but I understood why she was as embittered and kind of psychotic because I don't know how you handled all that trauma. Like I don't know if I would be a sane person if I had handled this, if I was going through the same trauma that this character is going through. I left a note in somewhere in the middle of reading this about halfway through the story. I wrote, what a sad, broken, miserable woman. And that's exactly what she is. And you're not supposed to like her. But at the same time, she does have some pretty spot on observations about life, even if they are a bit negative. I mean, a woman alone is spat on. Maybe that's not a literal thing, but definitely it's harder to exist in the world, especially at the time of this writing, as a single woman, especially a divorced single woman, than it is to be in a family unit, to be like the couple in the first story. She's trying to, and really failing at, she's trying to process and adjust to her new role as a divorcee, and it does not go well. She's trying to adjust to the changes in her role as mother. She's stripped of anything stable, and she's just on this downward spiral, and it is difficult to read. She's an incredibly desperate character. She says things like, bloody hell, I want to be treated with respect. I want my husband, my son, my home like everybody else. She can't handle being so outside of societal norms, being outside of everything she's seen and known as being like acceptable and comfortable. And it really sets her off kilter and makes her quite a mean person. She says, I don't give a fuck for humanity. What has it ever done for me? I ask you, if they are such bleeding fools as to murder one another, bomb one another, plaster one another with napalm, wipe one another out, I'm not going to weep my eyes. She's bitter, she's angry, she's alone, she is traumatized, she has nobody to help her process this. This woman needs some empathy, she needs something soft, and she has nothing. She's grieving. She's looking for some way to fill the holes that are left in her life with this grief, from this grief. And it's a really depressing story. It's short. I'm not going to spend much more time on this. It was at first, I when I first started reading it, I thought it would be the worst story like ever. I will say, just if you read this and you get to the monologue and you feel like you're stalling out, seriously, push through. It gets better. There's a reason why she is the way she is, and I trust me that you will eventually feel some amount of empathy for her. And then we have the titular story, the main focus, and that is the woman destroyed. Okay, the story. I really like this. It is a diary. It is the diary of a middle-aged woman who finds out that her husband is cheating, and she's cheating on her with a younger woman. She's cheating on her with a younger woman who has like a career. She's like the opposite of her. She is somebody who, she was a wife and a mother, and she didn't do anything else. She gave her life to this family, and he is cheating on her with this woman who is seemingly somebody that her husband would never have wanted, but of course he does now. And we watch her go through these journal entries. We watch her go through the process of finding out about this, of grappling with what to do, the advice she gets from everybody around her, the confrontations she has with the other woman and with her husband regarding the other woman, the ways they try to make everything work, and it doesn't, obviously. And it is a frustrating read because I think I don't know how this would have been taken when it was originally written and in France, but here in like 2024, I hate every piece of advice that people give her, because everybody basically tells her that this is what men do and that you just kind of got to accept it. Like it has nothing to do with you. Like down to her own daughters are just kind of like, yeah, mom, men just cheat. Like get over it. It is really frustrating to see how there's nobody that says to her, just get a job and get the hell out of that marriage. Nobody says that. And I hate it. I hate it so much. She struggles with her own aging body, her understanding her marriage. If she ever understood her marriage, I think if anybody has ever been married and had someone cheat on them, there is a lot of, especially if they leave you for that person, you do question a lot, like all the memories you have of that person in that relationship become altered by that affair. And you start to question reality in a lot of ways. Like, what was real? Was any of it real? Did they ever love me? And then there's just the questioning of why did I do it? Did I deserve this? What could I have done to keep it from happening? And we watch her go through all of that. She was devoted to her husband, and she was a devoted mother. I mean, throughout these diary entries, she's going to her one daughter who's sick and taking care of her. I mean, she wants to be a faithful wife and she wants her husband. She wants her husband so badly she agrees to like split time with this other woman to keep her husband, which I think is ridiculous, but these are the choices she makes. And in the beginning, before she finds out, she starts to see that her husband is changing. He has different demeanor and he's just doing things differently. And it finally comes to a head. It finally, these secrets come out that he has been cheating. And it's things start to make sense, right? You start to look back and she starts to look back. She starts to realize when he starts to change that there was something else going on. And then to just add insult to injury, we find out that he's been doing this for much longer than anybody ever thought. She says, "He has been enough for me. I have lived only for him, and for a mere whim, he has betrayed our vows." It is a really difficult thing to process, and it's heartbreaking to watch her go through it. All women think they are different. They all think there are some things that will never happen to them, and they are all wrong. I do agree with that thought process, that idea of, this could happen to anybody. It's not that, anybody did something to make somebody else cheat. But this sentiment kind of gets wrapped up into the, oh, but this just happens. This is what happens in marriages. You just kind of gotta like accept it. And I really hate the advice that she gets. She says, Isabel's quite right. It is perfectly natural for a man to have an affair after 22 years of marriage. It is I who would be unnatural, childish really, if I were not to accept this. Absolutely freaking not. You don't need to accept it. And I hate that that is the messaging that is being received from all of her friends. And all of this trying to balance between having his wife and his mistress really messes with our narrator's head, understandably so. And it becomes very emotional and very tense, and is really well done through these journal entries. I really like that de Beauvoir has chosen to structure this as a diary, epistolary novel, like those diary entries. It makes it so personal, and you really get to see how this is breaking this poor woman. I mean, the most staggering thing is my loneliness now that I am confronted with him. She still has her husband, she still has these things, but she's just alone. She stayed to home to take care of her children. She doesn't have a job to rely on. She doesn't have anything. She's very much stuck in this marriage, and it is much more difficult for her to get out. It's a different time, but I still wanted her to leave. I was so frustrated that she didn't have anybody in her life that was like, no, you don't need to stand for this. And here's how we're going to get you out of it. Um, and I really hope that that's something that has changed, and that if you wrote this story today, it's more likely to have characters that are going to tell you to get the hell out and not to stay, because he's an absolute coward. He could have left at any time, but he wanted a wife. He wanted to keep a wife. There's a reason he wanted a wife. There's a great quote here that says that men choose the easiest solution. It is easier to stay with one's wife than to plunge into a new life. Why start over with somebody else when you've built a whole thing with this person? You can just play house with this other woman, especially if your wife doesn't challenge you. It's so frustrating, and really shows how banking on marriage, banking on another person, investing your whole self into these other roles and not investing in yourself can leave you just bereft. Just she's so stuck, and it's just probably one of the most relatable stories in this little collection, because I think how many women have been in this situation where you have created a life for your children and your husband, and you've devoted yourself to this path of life, and to have it all sort of, for one reason or another, flipped on its head, and have it fizzle out, and how women seem to lose more than the men do in that scenario. While I was reading this, I kept thinking a lot about the whole trad wife movement, and this whole idea of having your whole life role be that wife and mother and homemaker, and having those very strict gender roles. And then what happens? What happens if that doesn't work out? You've been out of the job market for your entire lifetime, like adult life, for 10 years, 5 years, 12 years, 20 years, whatever it is. How do you go out and get a job in a time perhaps where you couldn't get bank accounts or something? Like, who's vouching for you? What's going on? These are real fears and real things that women have to deal with. And to glorify this idea of the trad wife, this idea of like everything, putting everything into this basket and relies on a human being, a very fallible person, um, to keep it going. If that person fails you, if that person goes and cheats, if that person divorces you, if that person leaves, if that person dies, what do you do? How do you survive when you've devoted your entire life to others and you've done very little to make sure that you are supported at the same time? It's scary. It's scary. And I think that this story does a really good job of looking at what that could look like when it crumbles. It's a matter of statistics. I like this quote. It's a matter of statistics. When you put your money on married love, you take the risk of being left flat at 40, empty handed. You drew a losing ticket. You're not the only one. It's definitely a very common thing that happens. It's definitely something that hopefully is easier societally and in a lot of other ways to recover from today, compared to when these were written back in the day. Times have very much changed, but things have very much stayed the same. These were originally published in 67 and were translated into English in 69. So definitely divorce, women in the workplace, being a single woman, the roles of women have really evolved since then, but there's still dangers lurking. So it's important to read stories like this. But I really think that it was just excellently constructed. I love the diary entries. I love the way the diary entries kind of speed up and lose sort of their exactness, as in those moments where she's more emotionally um, charged. In the beginning, it's very much like Tuesday, March 20th. And like she's very much rooted in time and, connected in time. And then when it's more emotional, it's just kind of like a day, or just be like Tuesday. It'll be like, you can see how she's kind of lost in her own emotions and whatever she's grappling with. And yeah, I mean, it was well written, also frustrating. Really loved it. I love this collection of stories. I think they're absolutely worth reading. If you have been wanting to pick them up, please do. I think that this cover is very interesting. I think that one of the videos I'm linking below talks about this a little bit too. This has a very like eye-catching cover, a very like trendy looking cover, like it girl, like I'm a thought daughter like cover. So you could be like cool 20 something reading this book. And while I don't think that there's a specific age that shouldn't be reading this book, I think that as you get older and as you have more life experience as a woman, this story resonates very differently. And I think you're going to have a very different connection to it if you're a little older, if you've had children, if you've been married, if you've been divorced, if you're at a transitional point in your career, those kinds of things. I think that's what de Beauvoir is capturing in these stories, and I think it's more relatable when you've lived those experiences than when you just kinda maybe existentially you just kinda know, not existentially, I have existential on the brain, um, more than when, like, you just kind of know that those things exist. Like, you you can intellectually understand that they exist, but you haven't lived them. When you live those experiences, I think this will hit very differently. I love the cover. I think that this is I right up my alley. Love it. Please never change from this uh, pantheon, but please read this. I love it. Again, thank you for everybody who read along. If you want to read along, we read a different book every 2 months, and there's a little Discord, and you can join my Patreon or memberships here on YouTube, and you get access to the Discord and chat on the discussion boards over there. It's pretty chill and pretty small at the moment, but yeah. The next one I'm going to be talking about is going to be Stoner again. I know I already have a review on the channel. I want to do a second look at Stoner because that is the November December book for 2024. So that will be coming down the pipe. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts if you've read this. If you have any recommendations for story collections that hit the same sort of themes, age brackets, challenges for women, I would love to know those down below. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up because this is a longer video. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. Bye.